The United Kingdom, one of the world's strongest economies, is now on its knees. The country faces an economic failure, and the times ahead seem even darker. The debt rate has doubled, there are impending blackouts, the currency is collapsing, and 3/4 of British pubs might close. Additionally, the new UK administration announced its intentions to borrow billions of pounds, demolishing whatever trust was left in the country. But how did Britain end up in this situation in the first place? And where did it go wrong in its course of action? Let's see as we try and learn from the country's mistakes. Britain is seeing the biggest inflation rate in over 40 years, with prices rising by over 10% across the board. UK is also the only G7 nation whose economy has never recovered from COVID. People in the United Kingdom are seeing a loss of 5% of their life savings, and the rising crime rate, uncertain government, and high cost of living brought on by the energy crisis, the war with Russia, Brexit, and other recent events have skyrocketed property prices, and a crash couldn't come at any worse a time. In 2007, everything seemed fine for the UK. It was predicted that UK's GDP would expand by 3% annually, and the pound would reach $2. And although everything seemed ideal, things were destined to alter. Because it took 5 years for the UK economy to recover from its pre-crash 2007 level, it has been in a constant state of decline ever since the 2008 financial crisis. Debt in the United Kingdom doubled from its pre-crisis level of 41.5% of GDP to its current level of 98.6% in just 5 years following the end of the recession in 2016. Taxes were raised, yet the economy appeared to improve due to these austerity measures. Nonetheless, the debt levels were still unsustainable, driving up the cost of living. The government appears unable or unwilling to intervene in the average. The repercussions of this are felt by anybody with a mortgage who works, eats, or buys anything. Because of the resulting dissatisfaction, the British people voted for Brexit and ushered in sweeping political reforms. Another thing to note is that Britain left the European Union trading bloc in search of more favorable trade agreements elsewhere. However, implementing these more advantageous trading agreements would take a long time. At the same time, it appeared that the UK's sustained strength in the global economy would eventually compensate for the initial loss from leaving the EU. However, no one could have foreseen the imminent threat posed by the coronavirus, which was especially disastrous for a country like the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom's economy slowed even further due to the international restrictions and the country's own stringent anti-COVID measures. While the isolation was being implemented, Johnson went to many parties. After the news of the incident spread, it became a major factor in Johnson's sudden departure and subsequent replacement. There were undoubtedly many other contributing causes, but the people would never forgive Johnson for this. Just when you thought things couldn't get much worse, another catastrophe would hit within days of the country reopening. Putin's invasion of Ukraine meant that all the oil and gas that Russia used to supply to the EU vanished instantaneously. So, as the supply dropped drastically, the demand grew to compensate, leading to average annual increases in energy costs for homes of 1,570 euros. And as the winter creeps near, it's unclear how the poorest will afford to heat their dwellings. 75% of pub owners are now predicting that they will be out of business with the current energy prices. To put this into perspective, this amounts to 35,000 pubs across the country, tens of thousands of jobs lost, and the hearts of English towns and villages decimated. There was a glimmer of hope when Truss was coming in. While campaigning, she promised to carry on Johnson's programs, but once in office, she rapidly instituted the most radical reforms the UK has seen in decades. Among her first acts as mayor, Liz announced a limitation on how much money the typical family could spend on electricity. Furthermore, Parliament is funding this program out of its own budget, which is causing the entire system to collapse due to the lack of available funds. There has also been a tax cut announced. However, it favors the rich more than the poor. Large amounts of UK pension fund money are invested in gilts, a bond that lets the government borrow money in exchange for interest. To safeguard their investments, some pension funds post collateral. This means that pension funds must compensate for their losses with liquid assets, most commonly cash. This isn't normally a problem, and pension funds rarely need to put up huge sums of collateral at once. However, since the price of these gilts dropped substantially, the pension funds were forced to post substantial collateral immediately. This led to more and more gilts being sold, leading to a catastrophic sequence. Resultantly, the Bank of England was compelled to spend $65 billion to end the downward spiral and buy the gilts. If it hadn't worked, the British economy would have collapsed like those in many developing countries. According to recent forecasts, the Bank of England will likely raise interest rates to 6% from the current 2.2% in the coming year. This means that Brits will have to pay 3 to 4 times as much for a mortgage. Cutting spending is another resort to mending fiscal stability, but it would be way more difficult to implement due to its dynamics. The UK has been in austerity for nearly a decade, but if the government doesn't act soon, things will only become worse. UK's cultural, social, and political wealth that once made it a global leader is now within reach. And now the whole world can see the awful truth for what it is. The World Economic Forum, billionaires, hostile nations, and multi-billion trillion-dollar investment firms are all waiting in the wings as the veil is lifted. The severity of the economic collapse, for now, is obscured by its complexity, but when push comes to shove, everyone will see how badly we're screwed.